So a quick introduction to our panelists, So next to me, Raymond Federici. Raymond is a self-advocate, a person with lived experience. Raymond, I know that you actually have worked in helping others transition from institutional life to community life. And
yes, I had the opportunity to become a certified peer specialist when our state became eligible for that. I was one of the first graduates of the training in Philadelphia as a certified peer specialist, and that dovetailed perfectly into my role as an aide on a Housing First program that was being run out of Philadelphia with Horizon House.
Thank you, and thanks for actually explaining it, because among ourselves, I think it's a new role, a peer specialist, so thanks for clarifying that. On my left is Joaquin Sapien. I think you spoke a lot, and you'll speak more, the co-producer of this documentary. We have Will Hall, who flew to be with us from Tel Aviv, but he was visiting in Tel Aviv. And Will Hall is a schizophrenia diagnosis survivor, a therapist, a radio host of Madness Radio, and the author of several books on voices and visions of madness. And then we have Elizabeth Jones here, who has worked in a variety of roles, overseeing and providing both services and oversight of mental health services, both in institutions and later in the community, and was actually involved as an expert in the case that was at the center of this documentary. So thank you for being with us. And we do have here a couple of people that I recognize from our allies. We have Julia Bascom from the association, the self-advocacy, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. And I'm noting, Julia, because we may want to call on you as an expert on these issues as well. So thank you in advance. And so I'm going to just first ask for reactions from our panelists to this film, and I'll begin with you, Will.
Okay, well, I was skeptical at first, but I'm actually just want to congratulate you, because this, I think, is a film that demonstrates investigative reporting at its best, shining a light on some failing that government or something in society wouldn't otherwise see. And the history of the mental health system and psychiatry has been atrocity after atrocity after atrocity in the name of help. And so as the film points out, we have atrocities in the state hospital system. Then we had the adult home, and it turns out that there were atrocities there. And now we're seeing that there are also atrocities in the independent living initiative that's now happening. So I was really glad to see these stories come forward, and hopefully there's going to be some positive things that come out of it. So I should say I really am appreciative of being invited here. I think that hopefully there will be more panels like this and more conversations like this. I want to thank the Open Society Foundation and ProPublica. I also want to thank my voices, the voice of my ancestors and the voice of God, for helping me to be here. And so I think that the film, the biggest weakness of the film is the title, actually, the name of the film. I don't think this is about the right to fail. I think that the film is more properly titled The Betrayal of Care. There's a promise to people. There's a promise to people offered coming out of adult homes into independent living, and that promise was broken. And even though what we know from the program, from the film is that the vast majority of people who have been moved out of adult homes are success stories, we do know that there are tremendous failings, and this film points that out. Any one atrocity is too many, and so it's very important that we also see the failings even as we recognize the successes of the program. But I don't think that the debate about should people be moved out of adult homes, independent living, is still a live debate. That's a settled debate. We've already decided this. We've already decided that it's not right to warehouse people in state hospitals and institutions, in snake pits. We've also already had a conversation about living independently of the adult homes. And we've already settled that conversation, and the initiatives are happening and they're spreading. And so what this film does is it shows us, points the way to do the transition from the adult home model, independent and supported living, in a much, much better way so that the failings don't end up eclipsing the successes.
Thanks. And let me just follow up with a question, Will. You
Yeah.
mentioned the voices, and you think
Yes.
the voices, and we heard voices, Nestor telling about voices and being asked about voices. And in general, just to ask a question about the medicalization of disability, right? So diagnosis appeared in the film. The fact that a person hears or doesn't hear voices meant something in terms of an entitlement to live in the community. What are your thoughts about that?
The challenge of doing a film like this is tremendous because you're talking about a topic that is in the shadows. It's surrounded by stigma and taboo. And so in 2 articles in the New York Times or in a documentary, you really can't address all of the stereotypes and all the misunderstandings that the viewers might bring to the film. And so that, I think, is maybe one of the challenges that I would offer to documentary filmmakers, to take the time to kind of break through some of the stereotypes that are associated when you bring up a topic like this. One of the stereotypes is that hearing voices, having suicidal feelings, having delusions, having paranoia somehow disqualify you from being in the community and being a participant in society. It's not true. Many of us who hear voices, many of us who have paranoid feelings or delusions or have suicidal feelings sometimes, we live with them quite successfully in the community. These are not disqualifying criteria for living outside of the community. In fact, being paranoid about people out to get you and seeing your enemies everywhere can be actually quite an asset if you're the head of a corporation or maybe even president of the United States. So suicidal feelings are actually quite common. We just don't talk about them, so we associate them with panic and urgency and emergency. And so that would be one thing that I would point to. Another, that there's a misunderstanding of what would qualify you or disqualify you to live independently. And many people hear, most people, the research is very clear. Most people who hear voices, like I hear voices, don't have a problem with it. There are many famous people. Paul McCartney hears voices. Sigmund Freud, founder of psychology, he himself heard voices. In fact, the Old Testament, the Bible, was practically written by people who hear voices. So that would be one thing that I think could be strengthened in terms of the misunderstandings around mental health. Another thing is the research that's now coming out and the new perspective that's coming out about medications. Very clear, many people are helped by medications. Also not known is that some of us find that we're helped better without medications, that we find a new path without medications. That was my story. I'm not anti-medications, but we need to understand that this is not as simple, you need medications, that's the end of the story. It must be individual. Again and again and again, this film points out that the lack of having individualized care is a problem. If you heard, one of the last things that was said was that Nestor's friend says, well, if he does well, it will trigger him losing this support. This is bureaucratic red tape nonsense. This is how people fall through the cracks. So, as I said, I think that as an investigative journalism piece, this is a very valuable and very positive contribution, but also because the topic is so shrouded in taboo and misunderstanding and stereotype, there could be more time taken to break some of the misunderstandings that I think many of the viewers might bring to the film, just from the background of prejudice, discrimination, and stigma in society.
Thanks, Will. I'm sure we'll hear more from you. I want to turn to Raymond. So Will spoke in principle about the issue of meds or people at risk, and that these people can live successfully. Now, you actually worked with these people, and if you can share some of those experiences in relation to what we saw in the film as well.
Well, I keep going back to one of my stories, one of my persons that I worked with. I was a mobile certified peer specialist, and we were able to go out and visit people mobile. We would go out in the community. We were separate from case management and from residential, and we could actually spend time developing a relationship. I was able to spend a lot of time connecting with my peer. And it's not to stereotype him, but him personally, but to refer to him, I used to the image of Fred Sanford. How many of you guys ever see Fred Sanford? Okay. He was upfront. He was brash, and if you didn't like it, he would tell you, kind of, for Fred Sanford type of mode. And I was able to spend a whole lot of time with him. And his challenges for me were that he had no filter. So he would say whatever he was thinking. And I spent time with him. He was one of the few people that actually had his own bike. And we bonded over me visiting him and going out on the community on bikes. And we could do that. And he was still on medications. And there were times where he needed to be hospitalized. But it didn't matter about whether he was on medication or not, whether he was taking medications. And it didn't matter regarding what kind of support was going on. It seemed to happen independently. So, but I made sure that I would go visit. And I would go visit him in the ward. And I, generally speaking, became the first person he would be looking for when he was in the hospital. And it got to the point where he actually wanted to adopt me as a brother. So we had a real tight bond. And he started to learn from me and wanted to do the same things that I do. And at one point, I found out later, he went to visit the program I took him to see. It was a drop-in center. And on a weekend, without telling anybody, he got on the bus, got there by himself, spent the day there without telling anybody that he went. And he started to go there more often because I took him there. And he liked the people there.
So thank you for this example, because I think it concretizes what it means to work and support people with disabilities. And if we now think about the people we saw in the film, Abraham and Nestor, and the way they were supported, we heard some question being out there, are they too hard of a case to support in the community? Now, I'm not asking you to diagnose that, but I'm asking you from your experience, just to answer, would you say there are some people that it's, outright, it's too hard to support them to live in the community?
I would say that there are challenges, but everyone has the right to live in the least restrictive setting. And to be honest, both of them pretty much stated where they felt comfortable with being. In the end, both of, I forget their names, Nestor and Clementine, were able to choose where they wanted to live, okay? And it's kind of sad that it took so long before the system actually turned around and heard what they wanted what it was that you wanted.
Thanks. I'm going to go over to you, Elizabeth. And I'd be interested to hear what you think. Do you think that, what does choice mean to you in your work when you're thinking about big processes of helping people transition into community living? What does choice really mean? Did we see it here?
Well, thank you, Tirza. I actually found this documentary very painful to watch. I was one of the early people who went through the adult care homes to try to build the evidence for the lawsuit that was being developed back in 2010, 2011. And it was clear seeing that setting that people were being dehumanized and losing skills by the nature of the environment. So the choice in my mind, and I think in the mind of the colleagues I was working with, was a fairly simple one. It was, how do you offer people a meaningful way of choosing an alternative to living in a dehumanizing environment that's destroying your skills, that's preventing you from learning and becoming independent to the degree that you can, that in some cases was actually escalating people's mental illness by the conditions. It was not unknown to have stories told about people jumping out of windows in the adult care homes and killing themselves because they felt that they would never be able to leave. So in my mind, the choice was straightforward. Everyone has the right to live in a community setting and to have an ordinary life surrounded by ordinary people. And the task was, how do you actually implement that choice in a responsible way so that you don't have stories like what we just looked at? And I think it is a betrayal of care. It is a failure of the system, because the system did not put into place the supports that we know exist in New York State that would have enabled the choices that Nestor and Mr. Clemente made and Bernard made to leave those dehumanizing environments and have an ordinary life like we enjoy. So I think the real crux of the matter here is what needed to be done to support that choice to be a successful choice. And the fact that that support was not given, even though we know what those supports are, and the Medicaid payments in this state pay for those supports, why did the system fail people and not give them the opportunity to have better lives and to have increased supports if they weren't able to live as independently as everyone had hoped at the beginning? The goal was that people would live and have the opportunity to live an ordinary life. It did not mean that they would be left alone. It did not mean that Nestor would have the aid after he went through successive series of obstacles and failures. Why didn't he have the aid at the beginning, 4 hours a day, that would support him in living a meaningful life? So the system failed. The system failed to help people implement a meaningful choice to live a freer life that had meaning to them and that wasn't one surrounded by the oppression and the dehumanization of the adult care homes. And so I think in the end, we have to help figure this out. We should be talking about this because there are several thousand more people living in these adult care homes. And this case is scheduled to end in 2020 if the state of New York has met its obligations, which it has not so far. So this is a good discussion to be having, and it's one that really belongs to all of us to have, I think.
Thanks. I want to go back to the belongs to all of us. And Julia, I'm going to ask you a question in a second, but just like a little interlude. Interestingly, the film itself, if you noticed, uses time and again the term independence, right? Living independently. I just want to note that when we participated, in the negotiations on the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And when this article came to be discussed, there was some pushback against the use of the word independent living, because for many, just that plain term meant, you've got to show that you can do things alone in order to be able to live in the community. And so the whole positioning in the film of independent living as that's what we want, that's what we're aiming for, they failed to, they were not, it turns out they were not independent enough, or they were not giving the means to be independent. It could take us in all kinds of directions. And one thing I'm curious to know is what independence means. When we think about it, is it about being able to do things alone necessarily? I think I see here is Tony, the first row, because I recognize you from the YouTube.
Yeah.
Do you want to say a word and introduce yourself?
My name is Tony Phillip. I'm a past president of the South Advocacy statewide board. And I'm back on the board again for South Advocacy for people with disabilities. Truly, I look at that word as independent and a good word to use, because everybody needs help sometimes. Okay? I don't care who you are, you need help sometimes. So that word independent is not really true. Okay? Another thing that I think about these agencies, that they put you out there.
Can you say a word about what you mean by agency? What does it mean to you?
When I say agency, it's like a group home where you live, where people can take control of your life. Okay? That's what agency means to me. They take control of your life. Okay? Now, when they put you out there and they want you to be independent, okay, you know what you need better than anybody else, even better than a doctor, because you with yourself 24/7, okay? And if you know what you need, you should be able to say, hey, I might need help in this and this and that. Okay? Another thing that I think they need is to be better so what agency will be open so people who want to come back and say, hey, look, I need more help. How can you, without taking away my independence, how can you help me?
Thanks very much, Tony. And actually, I want to go back to Elizabeth and Julia. I'm going to get to you in a second. So Tony says, I, in other words, all of us, each of us, I am with myself 24/7. I know best what I want. I know what can help me feel supported. And I want to ask you, Elizabeth, as someone who looks at a system, can we as society systemize that? Can we design services that it's a system, but that addresses people? Or is that something we haven't yet figured out?
Well, we do know now a lot more about how to build the supports for people, and it starts with the person. So the system is only responsive if you start with the person. and you understand what it is that the person is asking for and what the gaps are in the person's skills or knowledge, the need for support. The challenge is taking bureaucratic systems and making them responsive to people. And that's why we've learned a lot from peers who work with people now in the field, and where we've learned a lot from listening to what clients actually would like to see in place. Mm-hmm. So yes, we have very good examples of responsive systems. And if, for example, assertive community treatment had been used with the men in this film, that might have made a difference if in fact they were listening to what the person, I say client because I'm always surrounded by lawyers, I think, but what the client was asking for. So yes, you can have systems that work, but it requires accountability, requires starting with the person, and it requires making your supports flexible enough so that you're not locked into rigid ways of doing things, but you have the ability to be flexible and responsive while you're being accountable at the same time.
Thanks. Raymond, you want to respond?
On that note about independence, right? One of the things that we decided when I worked with a team of other peer specialists in Philadelphia, we all finally got together and realized that one way that we could push the system to give people independence. These were people that were in long-term structured residence. They came directly from state hospitals. And supposedly the system was helping them become more independent. Oddly enough, when we sat down and we worked out a list of things, the following things, everyone here has a wallet, right, with them? Okay. 1, get the person a wallet. 2, everyone here has an ID. You wouldn't believe how many people that we worked with weren't able to carry their own ID with them. No. Not to say that they even had an ID, because no one took them to get an ID. Then that whole slew of things of whether did the person have a Social Security card to get the ID, all right? And in order to get the Social Security card, you need to show ID. So which comes first? You know. Then the biggest thing that I still get to this day is helping people get their own cell phones. One of the things that a lot of people, many of us use for our own independence, is the ability to be able to communicate to people when we want to. And the system was also very in your face about, is this person able to handle having a phone? So there were some simple things that we did as certified peer specialists that pushed the envelope regarding helping people with their independence.
Yeah, I think what you're expanding on is that life in the community is not only about people having a place and us being confident, okay, it's clean and they're living a standard life, but it's about, okay, how are, do they have the tools, and do they want support, and can we support them in getting a life?
We had quite the argument with the director at one of the programs about the fact that in order for us to work with this person, take him out in the community, he needs to have ID with him because we're taking him on the bus. Oh, well, he's going to lose it. Or worse, he's going to go down to the bar. Well, wait a minute, is he not 21? Can he not go to the bar and get a drink? Anyway, there was just a whole lot of excuses regarding being able to support a person with being able to at least get steps to feeling like they were their own person living in the community.
Thanks, Raymond. Julia, any remarks on the issue of choice, independence? So Julia from the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network.
Thank you. Yes, hi. So I'm the executive director for the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. We work a lot with Tirza. And I mean, honestly, I wrote some stuff down, but Will and Tony, and I forgot your name, I'm sorry, have already said most of what I wanted to say very clearly and much more gracefully than I think I could. It's a little bit interesting to me watching this film because as an autistic person, I come from the DD system for people with developmental disabilities, where there's a presumption that most of us are gonna need help over the course of our life, and we're not gonna like gain skills to a point where we don't need that help anymore. And that's a separate question from whether or not we're in charge of our lives, and that's not necessarily what independence is called. By some metrics, I don't live independently because I live with a support person who, much like the man at the end of the film does. By other metrics, I do because I decide what I'm gonna do and where I'm gonna go and so on and so forth. I think the documentary, it says at the beginning that it's about people with serious mental illness and who decides where they live, and I was excited for that because we've done a lot of work on that topic, on talking about people with intellectual disabilities, people with mental health disabilities who are institutionalized, and how you support people to explore their options to have informed consent, which can be really challenging if that person has grown up in an institution and has a really serious cognitive disability. How do you help them make those decisions? How do you help them get the supports in place and move out? And our argument is always that, like, if you're not doing that, if you're not engaging people in those decisions and then providing the resources that are necessary, then you haven't deinstitutionalized them, right? I think the film ends up being about just like this total failure to support community living, right? And I'm troubled that that framing is still there around who decides and that it's called the right to fail, especially because that's such an important concept in the disability community. And it's really not what this is about. This is really about just the fact that these people were systematically failed. It's not unbelievable to me as like a policy advocate that the system was so badly designed, but as a human being, it's unbelievable. Like, that shouldn't be a thing that happens. I know in reality that like states have these lawsuits all the time, and then they have to go back 10 years later to say the state did not live up to its obligations, did not provide the baseline supports. And that's absurd. That shouldn't be happening. But I feel like often this film is framing things as, because these men heard voices, they shouldn't have been able to have control, as opposed to these men weren't properly supported and they suffered and they died as a result. And that's just what I keep coming back to. We have a right to fail, we don't have a right to be failed. And I feel like that's a story that this film tells very compellingly, but it gets mixed up, like Will was saying, in all these other tropes that our society has about people with cognitive disabilities. I was supposed to keep this short, so I'll just say I think that our society in general, when we think about people with cognitive disabilities, we think that we have to choose between getting support and having control. And one of the most important things for people to know is that that's a false choice, that people can need support, people can need very intense support, 24/7, one-on-one, two-on-one support, and still be able to live where they want to live and have normal lives. It's something that we see happen over and over and over again. And I would love to see those stories told as well as the human cost of saying that you're going to do that and then failing to live up to those promises and failing to support people to have those lives, which I think this film does illustrate very, very well. Who do I give this to?
Thanks, Julia. I see Tina Mankiewicz here. Tina, can we ask you a question in a second? If I'm going to go back to Joaquin, would we be able to ask you? I'm putting you on the spot, so feel free. So I'll get to you in a second, Tina. I just want to, Joaquin, we've heard you up there, but we'd love to hear, you've heard such a rich basket of responses.
So yeah, I'm happy to respond to a few things that I've heard. First of all, thank you all for the really thoughtful remarks and for arranging this. I'm really glad to have this audience that's so invested in this subject take the time to watch it and tell me what they think. Obviously we knew it was a pretty charged topic and that it needed to be approached sensitively, and I hope that we've succeeded in that. The thing that's come up a lot so far this evening is the title, "Right to Fail," and I have to say the reason why we used it is because it came up almost as a first line of defense from the providers over and over and over again. Every time we pointed out a situation like Nestor's or like Abraham's, the people who were responsible for providing care said to us, well, they have the right to fail. And when you asked back, well, did you really give them the opportunity to succeed? They really couldn't say in good faith that they did. And so, you know, that was we felt it was important to kind of force people to reckon with, viewers to reckon with what the right to fail looks like when someone is executing that right, you know, coherently or not, or exercising that right coherently or not, in the system that they're in. And again, I mean, what was promised was not really the reality for a lot of people in supported housing. And this was all litigated. I mean, for a long, long time. You know, the state fought tooth and nail against this. And then finally, when there was a settlement, what they decided to offer was a pretty bare bones version of supported housing. And as you see at the end of the film, there are other options out there where there's a lot more supports involved. It's a lot more expensive. Unfortunately, you have to fail out of the care that doesn't work repeatedly in order to get it. I don't think that Nestor was being considered for what he wound up in until we showed up and started asking questions about his case. And recently, I had a story about this that touches on this just yesterday, that shows, I think, both his fragility and the fragility of the system that serves him. His aide sort of abruptly left, and he wasn't able to keep up with his medication regimen. Who knows if there's a cause and effect there? Probably. And he very quickly, the most severe of his symptoms of schizophrenia began to emerge, and he was hospitalized for 4 months, and he just got out 10 days ago. And the aide was only gone for 5 days or a week or something like that. And then the other thing I wanted to speak to was these questions about success, which I think is a really important one and can be defined in all sorts of ways. I mean, how do you truly gauge the success of someone who's living on their own, who has been in an environment like an adult home, that it's so rigid and so dehumanizing for such a long time? Because the other thing we heard a lot from providers and a lot from advocates and a lot from others was that, the overwhelming majority of people are doing well in supported housing. But when you start to pick that apart, it's not always that clear. I mean, in fact, the independent monitor who's been assigned to oversee this transition has said in his reports again and again and again and again that the state needs to develop a quality assurance system so that it can track bad outcomes and respond to them. And the state didn't do that until it had to. About a year ago, last summer, this system was a sort of more centralized system of tracking incidents and responding to them was developed. And we've seen some early results of that. And as it turns out, they've been very delayed in investigating incidents like some of the ones that you would have seen here. So, it's not totally clear how many people are really thriving and how many people are, stagnating and how many people are outright failing based on that. And so, I think we wanted to kind of create a more sort of nuanced and deeper portrait of what it looks like. I mean, some of the people in this film would have, by some standards, been considered success stories, people that you might not think, like Abraham. Abraham was in his own apartment. He was living in a community under a roof, sleeping in that bed night after night. I don't think that anyone looking at the condition of his apartment would say that's success necessarily, but because he was physically there, he would not have shown up in any of these other metrics as a quote-unquote failure. And what I think the system has come to kind of accept is a lot of problems that have come up over and over and over again that we heard from almost everyone. And we spoke to dozens of people who had made this transition. Almost everyone said, I'm having a very difficult time getting my benefits checks. I'm having a very difficult time getting my SNAP benefits. It got to the point where that was sort of being shrugged off, and it was almost expected that people were going to have this kind of difficulty. But that's important stuff. I mean, having food in your refrigerator is really important. Being able to keep the lights on, being able to, to know when money is coming in and out is extremely important. And again, that came up as a problem.
There's a lot in what you're saying, and I want to be able to bring some of this out. So you focused, among others, on this issue of outcomes and success, and we're measuring success of people. And I don't know if Tina is still here. Yes, you are. There's a lot here. There's the question of the outcomes we're looking at. There's a question of choice. There's a question of voice. There's a question of control. So I'm wondering about your responses. Just to introduce Tina Mankiewicz, one of the lead advocates on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and from the U.S. Network of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry.
Thanks. Actually, my organization is called the Center for the Human Rights of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry. There's so much that I would want to respond to, but I fully agree with what Julia said about the right to fail and not the right to be failed, and that could actually probably sum up a good lot of my response to the documentary. I think one thing that was of concern to me was hearing the concept of what's happening when a person is refusing care. Like, okay, what do you do when a person refuses care? Well, hello, free and informed consent. It's a human right. It's a right recognized for everybody in the state of New York, except if they think you lack the capacity to make a decision. That's something that we changed in the UN Convention that requires, as a standard of human rights, instead of taking away the person's right to make a decision, offer them support. And support for decisions, and support for any kind of supports and services, support to live your daily life. It has to respect the person's autonomy, will, and preferences. So, okay, how do you actually go about creating support that does that? And I would not say that you just surround the person with support like assertive community treatment, and I don't think that that necessarily is sufficiently respectful of autonomy. One model that I know of that actually does the kind of outreach to people and respectfully builds the ability to give support in these very kinds of situations is called the Personal Ombudsman. It's a program developed in Sweden, and it's implemented differently in the different provinces, but in the province of Skåne, it's implemented jointly by an organization of users and survivors of psychiatry, and they have some other partner. And the way they describe it, the PO is doing outreach to someone who is very much like the people we saw in this film. Especially, I could see Abraham being a candidate for that. So the PO, person who wants to be the PO, person who's being paid by the government agency to do this kind of work, would go try to establish, knock on Abraham's door, hey, I'd like to talk to you. I'm interested in talking to you. Do you want to talk? No, go away. Okay, well, hey, is it all right with you if I maybe leave a note for you? Okay, you can leave a note for me, And then, so first you establish communication. Once you establish communication, you build a relationship. Hey, Abraham, you want to go out? You want to go out for coffee? You want to go out for a smoke? Whatever. Okay, let's go and do something. And then once there's a relationship, the PO would say, listen, I can do some stuff to help you. Maybe you're not getting your benefits. I can do the tasks that you assign me to do. I'm completely accountable to you. I'm not reporting to any authorities about you. And that is a program that is having a lot of success, and Mats Jespersen, the person who is really responsible for it, is traveling around the world and teaching people about it. So I would say that when a person doesn't want help, they have a damn good reason. What has Abraham's experience been in the past with people coming to help him? And what has his experience been with police coming and knocking on his door? Don't we know African Americans in particular are being killed by wellness checks, by police coming for wellness checks? So I think we really have to look at some of these contexts. One other thing I want to mention, in the US, in the Congress, there's a bill called the Disability Integration Act that would create an enforceable right to live in the community. It builds on the ADA, and I think it's a very good piece of legislation. I think there's still things that can be improved in it, and I keep working with the people who are drafting it to make it even better. But that's what I've got. Thanks for asking me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tina. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I see Jennifer here. Yes, Jennifer Mattis from Bazelon Center, one of the key lead advocates on the case. Any chance, I know that you came in while we were talking, that you want to say something, because we'd love to hear.
Sure. So sorry, I just came in a few minutes ago, so I missed most of the discussion. I just would say, I think, in terms of suggesting that supported housing is sort of a bare bones set of services, I mean, I don't think that that's accurate. I don't think that that's how the program is described, or how the program functions generally. And there are certainly a lot of folks who need a lot of help, a lot of support, who are in supported housing, who and get the support they need. I think the folks in the film did not. I don't think that means supported housing is not a good program, or does not serve people with very significant needs. I think there are people with extremely significant needs who are served very well by supported housing, including people with similar needs to the folks that were profiled. So I just would say, I think that it is important that obviously you get the services you're entitled to. And so if Nestor was supposed to get a home health aid and he didn't get a home health aid in supported housing, that doesn't mean supported housing doesn't work. That means he should get a home health aid. So, and you do have to build in, the quality assurance systems to ensure that people are getting what they're supposed to get. But I don't think you can tag sort of the whole supported housing system as being inappropriate for serving people with significant needs.
Thanks. Let's do, I do want to get back to the panel to respond to whatever you want to and sum up. But before doing that, let's just see, maybe take 2 or 3 quick questions, short ones, or comments, and in the hope of being able to respond to them.
Okay, good evening. My name is Mr. Harvey Pact. I am a self-advocate. Okay, I live in a supported living unit with a provider agency that supports people with disabilities. I live entirely on my own. I have no roommates. Okay, but I do get some staff support where I live. Yeah. But otherwise, I am very much independent. I do my own laundry and shopping. Occasionally I clean up a little in the house. Okay, now, not everybody can live independently. This depends upon the person's capabilities and limitations. You see, because not all people with disabilities are the same. They have different strengths and weaknesses. Some people need to live in a capacity where there's more support. And there are those who can live in places where there's less staff people. This depends upon how much care the person needs. So these capacities need to be, available. Okay.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes, you can. I'll see if I can come up with a quick answer.
Thank you. Because you're sharing, we have the opportunity to hear from someone who's actually living some of the issues that we're talking about. If there is one thing that you would want to improve in the system, what would that be?
Well, making sure that the people are being given the care which they're supposed to get. That people with disabilities are supposed to be given the supports and services which are indicated in what is now their life plans. Formerly, the life plan it had a different name to it. It'll come to me sooner or later. ISP, Individual Support Plan. But this explains all of the person's supports and services, residential, day hab, employment, and every kind of support and service this person gets. MSCs at Medicaid Service Coordinators are no more. They're now care coordinators. This started July 1st of last year. Okay, but they would provide the same kind of service, though I guess they're just working under a different title.
Thanks, Harvey. Let's take one or two other comments. I
Oh,
see behind
good.
you.
All right, thanks for letting me speak.
Thank you. First, oftentimes in therapeutic environments where the psychiatry is the lead agency, the notion is when in doubt, medicate. And with regard to a system, the system no longer sees the individual as a human being, but a billing opportunity. So I think that these are failings that we are talking about, but they should not be acceptable as being the norm. And so I wanted to reference that. I also wanted to quickly say that in defense of documentary, and certainly in defense of a program such as Frontline with a very specific time amount, there are a lot of things that may not have been included. And one has to also appreciate that how do we sustain this discourse beyond the immediacy of the viewing of it? And oftentimes that might fall to the filmmaker. Certainly it will fall to, hopefully, the broadcaster, and definitely to the audience for us to then be able to ask those questions, which is why a film like this is made and aired. So I would ask to the filmmaker, where else would you like this film to have gone or to go with regard to the messages that are coming out of the film? Understanding that it was Frontline and might have been, I don't know if it was 60 minutes only, if it was 90 minutes, but where were the cutoff points that you want to see the film go further into creating for us to have these types of conversations?
Thank you for this. What's your name?
My name is Gordon Skinner.
Thank you, Gordon. And I know, because just before the event began, Will, you were saying something along the same lines about some kind of a platform to bring in responses. If you can just say a word about what you were thinking. And then, of course,
About what I was thinking 2 hours ago. Okay, not to put me on the spot or anything.
Feel free to decline.
But I think this is very, very important because these are just a few stories in a larger system, and the move from adult homes to independent living is being rolled out to other states, and this is a model, and it's a future. And so I think ultimately this is a story about political power, and it's about who has the power. Basically, the problem with the mental health system is that we ourselves, as survivors, as patients, as people in the systems, we're not running the system. We need to be running the system. That's basically what needs to be happening. And the asylum system, the warehousing, and the state hospitals transitioned to adult homes, and the people who were running that were the people who ran the old asylums, and then that ended up being a disaster. And now we're seeing that the transition from the adult homes to independent living, when you let the people who are running the adult homes manage that, you still have the problem. So the larger problem here is political. It's about when are patients and people receiving services, and that we know best, and also the family members, the people who are connected to our communities, when are we going to not just have a seat at the table, when are we going to be in leadership for redesigning the whole system so that it actually solves these problems, so we don't have to have another film 10 years down the line pointing out the problems, and then another film 10 years, where we can actually get this problem solved. I'm encouraged by the atmosphere in our society where we're looking at some of the deeper issues, and we're looking at reparations around slavery, which is, it's about time that we have this as a national conversation, and we're looking at deeper issues of sexism and patriarchy and male dominance. It's about time that we have these conversations. We need to look at the root causes about what has been our social failing from the very beginning of psychiatry for people who are diagnosed with mental illnesses. And we need to start solving them at the roots.
Thank you. That was a beautiful point. It wasn't the one we spoke about before.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's totally fine. We'll take maybe two more questions. I see, yes.
Hi, my name is Danielle. My name is Danielle. I live independently on my own. I lived in I'm sorry, I'm getting all confused. I live in OPWDD self-direction program. The program has changed my life. I have staff that I choose. I vote. I clean my apartment. I go banking. I do my taxes. I'm an active member of society.
I don't know if I should be.
I'm an active member of society. And what I want to say is that we should stop treating the illness and start treating the person. Does that make sense? Did I say that right? You are not your illness. That's right. We should start treating the person and not the illness, and stop with this whole thing with managed care, because it's terrible.
Thank you, Zenya. I see.
Okay.
I see in the back with the red.
I forgot that I was in red, so. Thank you so much for this. So much food for thought, and thank you for bringing awareness to these vital issues. You know, it's interesting because my third grade best friend, you know, she lives on her own. She has a very rare genetic disorder. It's not mental illness, but she's 350 people in the world have what she has. And she was always told that she could not go to college. She was always told that many things would not happen for her. She's living on her own. She has her own graphic design degree from London University, all of these things because she has the right support systems. So as I was watching this film, I realized, you know, and she has the resources. She doesn't have to be on public assistance. She has, you know, a trust fund, and she has family that loves her, and, you know, she can't feel hot or cold, and she has a mark on her shower to tell her exactly where to put put the shower head so that she doesn't burn herself, these kinds of little things. And as a result, she has a care attendant maybe 2 hours a day, and she dresses herself and does all this to say that, you know, as I was watching this film, I thought about what are the ways that can be very simple that can, you know, allow someone to achieve those things that we're told we cannot do, right? And I think the question that I really have for this panel, because as I see it, even I'm about to publish an article about Uber for Forbes, and I have that platform to do that. And when you mentioned, the filmmaker mentioned, you know, it wasn't until we did this story that they really started to do things. I want to know, what can we do in terms of accountability? Because I think what I've been seeing over and over again is that these things happen and they get swept under whatever we can hide it under. You know what I mean? And one of the reasons I'm writing about Uber is that I found it was not the fact that I was discriminated against in a Florida Uber. It was the fact that when I was, the response was underwhelming.
Thank you.
And the only thing that they did was give me my $5.50 cancellation fee. And obviously, this is, I mean, a bigger question. What can we do in terms of accountability for the so-called failures that, you know, that obviously there must be something we can do. And so I'm curious from your perspective, what is the solution here? And how can we make sure that it doesn't take ProPublica or Forbes or maybe does it? I mean, that's, I guess, my question. I'm wondering where is the accountability and how can we help?
Thanks. Let's take one more. Yes, please.
So I live with cerebral palsy. I also have psychological disabilities, and my father is schizophrenic. When I think of his experience, he had persecutory delusions, and I reflect on his treatment. I mean, it's very clear to me now, both as his son and now as a lawyer, that he, like so many disabled people, was persecuted. And sort of, I try and think about how this problem could be dealt with. And it's like, my human reaction is, where do we get as a society when you end up persecuting a person that has persecutory delusions? Like, on a human level, almost 34 years old, I just want to say WTF. Like, I don't really know what to ask of this panel. This is.
But your question is loud and clear.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Tony, I'm going to actually give you the closure because I think you are a New Yorker, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as a film that focuses on people in New York, I'm going to go back to you to say the last word. But I do want to get the quick response here of the panel. One sentence, 2 sentences each. Choose anything that you've heard here that you just want to make a point about. Elizabeth.
Well, 2 sentences is tough. I think it's important that we look at the goal, which was that people are part of their community and that they have social networks. Being located in the community is just the first part of that. And I think that goes to Will's point of how you have the advocacy and the political pressure to hold states like New York accountable for the obligations that it has towards people.
Thank you. Raymond.
Well, I've been trying to clarify this quote. I've heard it recently, and it's been hitting me all since I've been here. And it goes something, the best disinfectant is by showing the light. So we have to show light on the situation. So in that sense, I'm glad that you guys did the video, because I've also realized, hey, I've kind of done investigative. I felt like you did some of what I've had to experience with working with people, find out where they went to, find out what happened. And the other thing, question is this whole idea of continuity of care that a lot of us have been told and talked to when we were in receiving services about continuity of care. And I just realized that the whole concept, somewhere along the lines, has been either broken or decided not to be important anymore to the system.
Thank you, Raymond. I'm going to say my quick summary, which is I think actually in the room we agree on many things and we don't agree on some things, and I'm glad for that. I mean, I think that this is where we can learn and maybe move from where we were to begin with. And the one area where I feel that there are different positions being brought out are, or maybe it's just very different perspectives, and they may intersect and they may actually also be in conflict, is this about setting up systems of treatment of people with disabilities? And then I think we're hearing perspectives that turns it on its head and says people don't need systems to be treated, to turn it on its head for people to determine what it is that they need to be supported, regardless of diagnosis, regardless of titles. So I don't know if these are totally commensurate with one another. And And it's good that it's out here. Joaquin.
So yeah, just quickly, the gentleman, Gordon Skinner, was it? Asked about where I'd like to see this going. And that's something now that this is done, I have to think about all the time. And I do think that, one thing that's important for me as a journalist is to be able to have this kind of a conversation with as many people as I can and to have access. And that was a difficult thing with this film. People on all sides were petrified of retribution from the Office of Mental Health in particular, and from the Department of Health in particular, of this administration. There's nobody from government spoke to us on camera. They were really, it was very, very difficult to get any kind of meaningful response from them. And to an extent, that does kind of determine where we go. We're going to want to look at what's going on behind closed doors, and we're going to want to hear from people who are willing to open their doors to us. And people who know this world well are in this room now. And so, I'm open to all sorts of ideas. So I'd like to invite people to, tell me what their thoughts are on the direction that I should move into. I think Will made a point earlier about what I've seen covering social services for the last few years is that there is a real problem with a pendulum swing that goes on where, in foster care, what you see often is for some time there'll be a real focus on family preservation, and then inevitably some scandal erupts of an abusive family, and so that'll increase removals, and you'll see more attention on foster homes, and then some scandal erupts in foster homes, and you start to move back and forth. And as a reporter, I have to be wary about contributing to that pendulum swing, which is not something that I really want to do. I would like to try to, move toward a more holistic solution. And I think what it really comes down to is trying to match distinct services to distinct needs. And I will say that the one thing that I've seen from people who emerged out of any one of these systems successfully is that there's been one person that has cared enough to be by their side through thick and thin. For Nestor, there's Nora Weinerth, who was a lifeline to him. I don't know how you create a system in which each person is guaranteed that. It's pretty hard to legislate love or to litigate it, but that does seem to be the answer, as corny as that sounds. So I think, what I've seen with the peer specialists seems like a step in that direction. I wouldn't want to see the system overly rely on folks that are peers. I've also seen them become pretty, wiped out by the work that they're asked to do. Anyhow, I'm open to hearing from all of you after this. I'll be here, and so you can help determine the direction that this goes.
Thank you very much. And I just want to pick up, Gordon, on your comment, and Will, what you told me before the event was, to take this into concrete terms, is there, not to answer now, but Joaquin, just to put it out there, is there some kind of a platform where some of these responses can be shown side by side or somehow figure into the presentation of the film? Is there some kind of a platform with place for responses, or just to think of how to bring in some of this input into the continued presentation of the film? That, I think I heard some of this question, and I think it's a testament to the fact that the film matters. Will?
Well, I like that you brought in love, because I think really that's what it's all about. I think we have bureaucracies and machinery instead of human connection. Again and again and again, it's not really about independence or support. It's about finding connection, not being isolated, having real connection, and having a sense of control and being in charge of your life. And we all know that it takes love and feeling loved and feeling deserving of love to get that. I think that's really the big failing, not just in our mental health services and disability services, but in our society in general. I think we need to take that seriously. I don't think it's corny at all. I think we really need to have that conversation about what is getting between us, connecting with each other. I think there's a couple of areas that the film doesn't get into that I would like to see part of the conversation. One is prevention, because I don't think that people are just ending up with psychiatric disabilities because that's how they started. There's a whole story that leads up to that. I think we need to talk about racism. I think we need to talk about poverty. And I think we need to talk about trauma, and especially child abuse, as leading to mental health conditions. And how can we prevent people from actually entering into the system to begin with, I think is something we need to really start to take seriously. And the second thing is also the way in which the treatments are not just for people's psychiatric disabilities, but sometimes the conditions and situations that people find themselves in are results of the treatments that they've had. The treatments are actually also harming many people. The medications, some of the cognitive and memory issues, different kinds of decline, physical decline that people experience are a result of the medications. Often people's unwillingness and difficulty to make connection with treatment providers, and when they're offered help, they refuse it, is because there was violence and force that happened in the hospital. I mean, I had an experience where I recently visited a hospital to give a talk, and I was immediately triggered and had memories from things that had happened to me 20 years ago. They were immediately right there, and I completely dissociated. I disconnected from my body. To this day, I have a very difficult time receiving sessions from a psychotherapist. In fact, I don't have a regular therapist, although I'd like to be able to get that support, because it's too triggering for me, because I've been harmed by therapists. So I think we have to take very seriously the way that the system is not just failing to meet people's needs, the system is actually creating the problem in the first place for many, many people in these harmful treatments that it offers to some people.
Thank you. Tony, you have the honor of saying the last word, but the challenge of doing it shortly.
Whole system need to look at one thing, putting people with the problem first. They need to be at the top.
They need to be at the top. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. There is refreshments outside. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.